So following the first formulation of the categorical imperative, Kant says, listen, at this point we've shown that if duty is going to have any meaning for us, if it's going to have any significance, it's got to take the form of the categorical imperative. And of course that first formulation showed us that that form, that categorical imperative form, really then is the content of morality for us. Right? Acting in the way that everyone ought to act, not making exceptions for yourself. That's just what we mean by being moral, by doing the right thing. But there in that paragraph, Kant says, you know, we've shown that that's what duty has to mean, but we haven't yet shown that you really have duty, right? That it actually exists, that it has to obligate us. And so in order to do that, Kant says, we're going to have to take our first steps into the metaphysics of morals. We're actually going to have to think sort of a priori here. And so what he's going to do over the next couple of pages, and these are really some of the densest pages in a book that's not terribly easy to begin with. But what he's going to do is then work his way through to try to show you why not only does duty have content to it, why it has meaning for us, but furthermore, that it really does apply to us, that we really are obligated to be moral. And if that way of putting things sounds a little bit familiar, it ought to. Why should I be moral? That's, of course, what Christine Korsgaard has called the normative question. So I want you to then take a look at these couple of paragraphs that follow. So remember that your will is how you determine specific actions in accordance with rules being given to the will. And of course, those rules can come from either reason or desire. Right? And so one way to put the question that we're sort of asking here is, okay, if reason and desire tell me to do two different things, why ought I to listen to reason rather than desire? And of course, you'll remember what I've told you is that reason gives you universal or objectively valid commands, whereas of course desire gives you simply subjectively valid commands. I want that, or I want to do that, is always a reason for me. But by the same token, I ought to do that, that's the right thing to do, is also always a reason for me to do something. So if what I desire is always valid for me, even if what reason tells me to do is always valid for everyone, why should I do the thing that's valid for everyone rather than doing what's valid for me? In other words, why should I care about what reason tells me to do? Especially, why should I care about it when it tells me to do something I don't want to do? And so here, I think Kant starts to think about, well, what does it mean for your desires to be valuable, right? What does it mean for the things you want to be worth taking into consideration? And so if you think about it this way, your desires are valuable because they are valuable to you. Remember, as a rational creature, you don't just act automatically the way an animal does. You determine your actions according to reasons. And so, when you look at one of your desires, you have to decide to act upon it, deciding to act upon it, deciding that it really is valuable. So Kant says the problem with each of my desires is that they are just contingently valuable, right? They are valuable to me, but what is it that makes their value to me valuable? But if all value were conditioned and hence contingent, then no Kant says what we would need is something that has value not just extrinsically, contingently based on my circumstances or my desire. We need something that has value in itself. But let us suppose that there were something whose existence has in itself an absolute worth. Something which, as an end in itself, could be the ground of determinate laws. In it and it alone would there be the ground of a possible categorical imperative. In other words, a practical law. And so this is what Kant says about reason. And in fact, reason as it exists in every rational creature. Reason is an end in itself. What exactly does that mean? Reason is the faculty that allows you to value things. And so it is not just valuable, it is actually the source of valuing, right? It is how you value things. And so, as the source of valuing things, reason isn't just valuable to you, it is valuable in itself. And so, every time I encounter reason, I encounter something that has value not just as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. It is valuable in and of itself. In my own self, when I have a choice between valuing what reason tells me to do and valuing what I desire, it is only because I am reasonable that I can even make this choice to begin with, right? It is only because of my capacity to reason. I have to value reason because reason is the thing that allows me to value my desires. But furthermore, because this is not just a capacity I have, it's also a capacity you have, every time I meet a rational creature in the world, a creature who works according to reason, I encounter a creature who is not just able to be valuable to me, but is also able to value things in themselves. They are valuable in themselves. I think of my own existence as an end in itself, right? Something that I am to pursue simply for the sake of it, let alone other things. But of course, Kant says every other rational creature feels this way as well, thinks this way as well, acts this way as well. And hence, every rational creature is an end in themselves to themselves. And so it's on this basis that Kant is going to give you the second formulation of the categorical imperative. We've been led to this formulation by thinking through what it means for duty to not just have content abstractly in a sense that it would make sense, but rather for duty to have content in its practical application to us. In other words, it's not just that the concept of duty makes sense, it's that I actually have moral duty. And my actual moral duty, Kant says, can therefore be expressed in this second major formulation of the categorical imperative, which tells you to act always so as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. Now, you can tell that this is one of the major formulations of the categorical imperative because Kant immediately jumps right back into the four examples we worked through after the first formulation. You've got the person who wants to commit suicide, the person making a lying promise, the person who's lazy and doesn't want to develop their talent, and the person who doesn't want to help other people, right? Same four examples, and of course, same four answers to those questions. But before we jump into that, let's actually work through this formulation. Act always so as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of any other. So, this is going to show you that not only do you have moral duties to other people, you also have them to yourself. And this, as Kant will tell you in a footnote, is one of the major ways in which the golden rule comes up short, right? Kant is, by laying out the categorical imperative, going to sound like he's saying something similar to the golden rule. The golden rule, of course, says, act toward other people the same way you would want other people to act toward you, right? This sort of universal. But the problem with the golden rule is it doesn't tell you how you should want to be treated. And so imagine it this way. Let's say I don't think that I deserve to be treated well. Let's say that I think people ought to treat me badly. The golden rule will tell me to do that to other people as well, right? Well, I think other people ought to abuse me and push me around, so maybe I ought to abuse and push around other people. Or imagine that I just prefer weird treatment, right? I kind of like it when people, I don't know, hit me or tickle me or call me nasty names, right? So the golden rule would tell me to, okay, hit or tickle or call people nasty names. Or, I mean, we can just get ridiculous with this, right? I like it when the other people bake cookies for me, so I guess I really ought to always bake cookies for other people. The problem with the golden rule is it doesn't tell you which ways you ought to demand to be treated, and therefore it doesn't tell you which ways you ought to insist on treating other people. The categorical imperative, by contrast, will do just that. Whether you or anybody else, it says, here is what you have to do. Act to treat them always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. So it's that means-end distinction that we really have to focus on here. Now, of course, the means-end distinction, not just in Kant, but anywhere we encounter it, works like this. An end is a purpose, a goal to be attained, right? And a means is anything you use, any way you use to get to that goal. And so, if I want to be in darkness, right, I could get up and go around and turn off the various lights. I could maybe just stop paying my electric bill and wait for the city to do it for me. I could stay here but maybe throw heavy things at the various lights in the room to try to break them all. Depending on what I mean by that, maybe I could just try closing my eyes. But in each of these cases, that same goal, being in darkness, could be met by a number of different paths or steps. Those would all be means, right? So when Kant says, treat people always at the same time as an end, notice he's not saying never treat people as a means. What does it mean to treat someone as a means? It's, of course, for someone else to help you get to something you are trying to accomplish, right? I am trying to get to the mall. If I ask you for a ride, if you give me a ride to the mall, you are part of my means to my end. My goal was to get to the mall. You helped me get there. So it's not that we can't ever get help from other people, right? In fact, as one of those examples shows you, right? We ought to help each other out. And in fact, we need to live in a world where people help each other out. People will serve as means to our ends. But Kant says we must never treat people merely as a means. Now, what does it mean to treat someone merely as a means? And now, Professor Pauline Kleingeld has, I think, a really excellent essay on this. And that essay certainly showed me that that question by itself is more complicated than you'd think it is. What does Kant mean by treating someone solely as a means? But let's, you and I, gloss over that a little bit right now. And let's just roughly say that you know what I mean when I say using someone. Right? Treating them merely as a means, using them. You don't care about them, You just care about what you're trying to accomplish. And so, of course, we can go right back to my favorite example about lying to someone in order to get money from them, right? If I ask you if I can borrow $2,000 and you tell me you'll loan it to me as long as I can pay you back in 2 weeks, I know I can't pay you back in 2 weeks as soon as I lie to you to tell you, oh, sure, I'll pay you back. Notice I'm just manipulating you because what's important to me is getting the money. And I'll say to you whatever I have to say in order to get that money. So here I'm just using you to get the money. I don't care about you. That's probably pretty straightforward and obvious. But if we can grant that using someone is an idea that we more or less understand, if we can grant that treating someone solely as a means is a concept we kind of get, what I want to focus on is actually the flip side of this. In other words, Kant says, never treat someone merely as a means, always treat people as an end in themselves. And what does it mean to treat someone as an end? And this is where that very terminology, right, the very language that we're using ought to give us pause, because of course a means to an end, that makes sense to us, right? But if an end is itself a goal to be accomplished, some sort of a purpose, well, what does it mean to treat someone as a goal to be accomplished or a purpose? Not just someone capable of setting their own ends, but treat someone as an end for you. What does that mean? Well, let's think about this money experience, right? Because of course, if I'm lying to you, well, why am I lying to you? I'm lying to you in order to get you to give me the answer that I want, right? Well, why do I have to lie to you to get you to give me that answer? Well, because I know that if you have the full facts, I'm not going to be able to pay you back in 2 weeks, that you will choose to say no. So rather than getting to you saying no, I'm going to manipulate you to make sure that you say yes. So imagine a slightly more banal example, right? Instead of borrowing $2,000 I can't pay back. Let's say you and I are in class and you are out maybe using the restroom or something when it occurs to me that I forgot my money for lunch today. And you know, you and I both have long class days, and so I'm gonna get awfully hungry if I don't have lunch. And there in your notebook, I see $10. And I know, say, because you and I are such good friends, I know a couple of things. First of all, I know that you don't really need that $10 today. And in fact, second of all, I know that if I wait until you get back and ask you to loan me that $10 for lunch today, you're totally gonna say yes. And so, instead of waiting for you to get back and ask you for that $10, I'm just gonna go ahead and take it now. And maybe later when I remember, I'll tell you what I did, right? Now, how is that any different than waiting until you get back to ask you for it? If you and I are good friends and I'm totally sure that you're gonna loan me that money, is it any different at all? Yes, it absolutely still is. Why is it different? How is it different? Well, it's different because if I wait until you come back from the bathroom and I ask you to lend me that $10, I give you the opportunity to say no. Even if I know you're not gonna say no, right? I still give you the opportunity to say no. I treat you as a being capable of making your own decisions. As opposed to, if I just take that money while you're gone, I deny you the opportunity to make that decision. I've denied you the opportunity to say yes and do something nice for me, right? I've taken the opportunity to make the decision out of your hands. I've made that decision for you. And that's the important difference. What does that have to do with treating someone as an end? Okay, well, I want you to compare that situation to, say, you've got your dog at the dog park, right? Your dog's running around, rolling in who knows what. And your dog comes running back, and there, kind of jammed weird into your dog's collar, is a $10 bill, right? Who knows what he was rolling in, but $10 got lodged in there. Now, my question is there any moral problem if you just take that $10 out of your dog's collar? No one else is at the dog park, doesn't belong to anybody else, so let's not worry about that. I guess I'm wondering, do you need to ask your dog whether or not you can take that $10 before you take it? And of course you don't. And even if you did ask your dog, he would have no idea what you were saying, and you would just end up taking the $10 anyway. So you don't have to ask your dog before you take $10. Likewise, you're leaving the dog park and you trip over something, and it's, I don't know, an old muddy half a Barbie doll ground into the playground, and there Barbie has $10 tucked up underneath her arm. Do you have to ask Barbie before you take her $10? No, you don't have to ask Barbie's permission, right? So you don't have to ask Barbie or your dog before you take $10 from them. Why not? Well, because they just aren't the kinds of things capable of saying yes or no. And not just because they don't speak English, right? They're just not the kinds of things capable of making decisions. And so you don't have to offer them decisions because they can't make them anyway. So you just make those decisions. But the problem is, when I get up and go to the restroom and you just take my $10, you treat me like a dog or a Barbie, something incapable of making decisions where you're just going to make those decisions for me. As opposed to, if you wait until I come back, even if you're absolutely certain what the answer is going to be, simply by asking me if you can have that $10, you treat me as a creature capable of making decisions. You offer me the chance to make the right decision or the wrong decision, say, I can choose to make the right decision. And so, what is it that allows you to make decisions? What is it that separates decision-making creatures like you and me from creatures like your dog or your Barbie that can't make decisions at all? And here, notice it's not a matter of being alive versus a Barbie isn't, because of course a dog is alive. It's more than just being alive or an animal. This is that feature of reason, right? It is because we are rational creatures that we can make decisions. And so by offering me a decision, by asking me to make a decision, you treat me as a rational creature. Whereas by manipulating me into making a certain decision, or by just going ahead and making that decision for me, you are treating me like an irrational creature, something incapable of making decisions. Now I can finally tie this back to our means-end language, because my question is, to what extent am I a rational creature? Am I a fully, completely rational creature? Do my actions always immediately accord with what reason tells me to do? Am I, in other words, morally perfect? No. No, I am not. Not even on my best day, right? On my better days, I'm more rational. On my worst days, I'm a little less. But the situation for you is, you don't have the ability to treat me as mostly rational, because you either offer me an open decision with full knowledge of the facts, or you manipulate me, or you make that decision for me. By offering me the decision with full knowledge of the facts, you treat me as a fully, completely rational creature. By making that decision for me or manipulating me, you treat me as a completely irrational creature, like your dog. And so your option is either to treat me as the fully rational creature that I always potentially could become, right? That morally perfect creature I'm striving to be, or by cutting that possibility out and treating me like an immoral or amoral, irrational creature. In other words, when you treat me as a person capable of making decisions, you don't just treat me as the person who's in front of you. You treat me as this morally perfect creature that I could become and am always striving to become. You treat me as a purpose or a goal to be accomplished. And through your interactions with me, of course, you are helping me to become that moral creature, right? You are giving me a possibility. You are giving me a scenario, a decision to make. You are offering me the ability to make the right decision. And it's only by making the right decision that I can be a good person. And so in this way, treating me as a rational creature is not just treating me as valuable, it's treating me as a goal to be accomplished, an end in myself. You allow me the ability to become a fully moral creature. But to kind of wrap up our discussion of this formulation of the categorical imperative, this second major formulation, the formulation of humanity as an end in itself, I guess I want you to think about what it would mean to really take this point seriously. What I want you to think about is all of the other people who have factored into you being able to do the various things that you've done so far today. I guess I want you to think about where does that water come from when you turn on the shower? Where does that food come from when you open up your refrigerator? Where does the electricity come from as you're cooking it? Your car and the gas in your car and the store. Our lives, in order to simply go through my life and live normally, I'm actually relying on the contributions of a number of other people, an extraordinary number of other people at this point. And those people, insofar as they have contributed to the project of my day, are certainly serving as means to my end. My goal is to have breakfast. They are helping me do that. My goal is to get dressed. They are helping me do that. My goal is to drive somewhere in my car. They are helping me do that. But what I want to know is, to what extent can you also treat any of those people as ends in themselves? To what extent can you make sure that those people are being treated as rational creatures capable of making decisions, not manipulated, that you are sort of openly asking for and receiving their help? Well, if you were to start with the shirt on your back, first of all, without looking, do you know where it was made? And even if you do, who made that shirt and under what circumstances? And so just notice there's certainly a big difference then between your shirt being made by, I don't know, some little artisan on Etsy and sent to you in the mail after you've had a personal email exchange with them, versus that shirt was made by a sweatshop worker in Bangladesh somewhere, right? Now, without really getting into global supply and trade, I bring this up because if your shirt is being made by a worker who's being mistreated or doesn't have proper options or is even being pressured, if your shirt is made through some sort of process of slavery, for example, then the person making your shirt, the person allowing you to have a shirt on your back, is being treated solely as a means. And by being the person who purchases that shirt and wears it, they are being treated as a means to your end. And so my question is, what would it mean to treat that person not just as a means to your end, but also as an end in themselves? And you might say to me, that just isn't possible under contemporary conditions, right? In order to make sure that you were treating all of those people as ends in themselves, You might need to know them personally. You might need to start making a lot of your own clothes or growing your own food, right? You'd really have to cut yourself out of a whole lot of global trade and economy. And I'm not telling you to sort of give up and move to the woods and become a hermit. What I am saying, though, is that we find ourselves living in an interdependent world where it's very hard, maybe even impossible, to treat everyone who contributes toward our ends as also ends in themselves. All of the people serving as means for us, we might not have the ability to treat them as more than just means. And so, what are we supposed to do if we find ourselves living in a world in which this second formulation of the categorical imperative just seems like we have to regularly violate it? And so I want to leave you off thinking about something like this. Let's say you are home on a Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and I break into your house, and I hold a gun to your head, and I force you to do something bad. Call up your mother and tell her a lie. Embezzle some money through the internet. I don't know, something immoral. Now, when you do it under duress, under direct threat from me, whose fault is it that you've done something bad? And okay, if we wanted to get really hardline existentialist here, we could say it's still your fault. You could have just let me kill you, right? But if you said to a judge, listen, I was acting under duress, that guy had a gun to my head, the judge would certainly take that under consideration and say it wasn't really your fault, and I'm inclined to agree, right? If I'm threatening your life, if I have a gun held to your head, it's my fault you're doing that bad thing more than it's yours, right? But I want you to think about how your circumstance changes if today you receive a letter in the mail from me and it says, I'm going to break into your house at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, and I'm going to hold a gun to your head, and I'm going to force you to do something bad. Now, if you are home at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, just minding your own business, and I break in and I hold a gun to your head, at the very least now we can say, you should have seen this coming. You ought to have taken some steps to avoid this totally foreseeable situation. Now, am I still absolutely a bad person for holding a gun to your head and making you do bad things? For sure. But I want you to notice that your moral responsibility here has also changed. Because certainly you could spend the time between now and Tuesday fortifying your house to make sure I can't break in. Certainly, you could spend the time between now and Tuesday calling the authorities to have them waiting to apprehend me when I break in. Or at the very least, you could spend the time between now and Tuesday getting as far away from your house as possible so that when I break in, I don't find you there. But if you've done none of that, if you have simply continued to live your life so that you are simply sitting at home minding your own business on Tuesday at 3 o'clock when I break in, I'm still a bad person for breaking in, but you now share some moral responsibility for doing the bad thing I force you to do. Now, what does that story have to do with anything? Well, here's the thing. If I find myself totally by surprise in circumstances where it is impossible for me to do the right thing, where I am forced to do bad things, okay, I'm not doing the right thing, but maybe it's not really my fault, and maybe I can say, hey, I'm doing my best here. But if I know already, if I see it coming, if it is totally predictable that next week I am going to find myself in a situation where I have no good options, where I can't make a good decision, then at the very least, I have a moral responsibility now to try to avoid that situation then. And so I think if we really take the second formulation of the categorical imperative seriously, what it would have to show us is that not only do I live in a world where it's impossible for me to really treat other people well, I think it would also have to show me that my moral responsibility is therefore to bring about a better world, to change the world such that I make it possible to do the right thing, or at least to do better things. That when we find ourselves in situations where we don't have good options, our moral responsibility now becomes change your situation. And it's in starting to think about what it would mean, not just to be a good person yourself, but to make the world possible for being a good person. That's going to carry us into the big third formulation of Kant's categorical imperative, this kingdom of ends idea.